Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of Results for America, I want to thank all of you for joining us today for the release of our 2021 Invest in What Works State Standard of Excellence, and for a great conversation on how state governments are using evidence and data all across the country to deliver more equitable results. We encourage everyone today to participate in this conversation by tweeting throughout the event using our hashtag State Standard and by following us on Twitter at Results for America. But before we begin our event, we want to acknowledge for a moment all of the state government leaders in Kentucky, Tennessee, Missouri, Arkansas, and Illinois who are dealing with the tragic tornadoes that ripped our country this past weekend. Our thoughts and prayers are with all of you. Over the last year, state government leaders have faced tough challenges, managing a rapidly evolving public health crisis to now building an equitable economic recovery. The upswing has been an increasing number of state government leaders who have been using evidence and data to protect the health and safety of their residents, to accelerate their economic recovery, and to advance racial equity. Our 2021 Invest in What Works State Standard of Excellence sets a national standard, a North Star as we call it, for how state governments can consistently and effectively use evidence and data in their budget, policy, and management decisions to achieve better, faster, more equitable outcomes for their residents. In 2021, we identified more than 200 data-driven and evidence-based efforts in 36 states across the country. This year, we are recognizing 9 leading states: Colorado, Minnesota, North Carolina, Ohio, Oregon, Tennessee, Utah, and Washington. We are also recognizing 4 honor roll states: Massachusetts, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Rhode Island. All of these states have demonstrated an increasing commitment to investing taxpayer dollars in what works. You can learn more about these state government efforts by looking at our State Standard of Excellence on our website. But this afternoon, we will also be hearing directly from 2 governors and senior state government officials about the work they are leading to leverage data and evidence in their recovery efforts and to embed an equity lens into their daily operations. We want to congratulate the leading and honor roll states, as well as all of the states featured in our state standard this year. At this point, just also want to thank our RFA State Standard of Excellence Advisory Committee members who helped us develop our standard this year, and all of the state government leaders who've been such great partners. And finally, we also want to thank the National Governors Association for their continued partnership, as well as Tim Blute, Director of the NGA Center for Best Practices, who will now give a few opening remarks. Tim?
Sure. Good afternoon. Thank you, David, for those welcoming remarks. And thanks to all of you for joining us here for this really important discussion. My name is Timothy Blute, and I'm the director of the Center for Best Practices at the National Governors Association. We are the team at NGA, so NGA represents the nation's governors, and our team works with governors and their policy advisors to help advance their policy goals across the country. So really, thank you so much to Results for America for partnering with us in this event. I think the work that we've done together over the last few years is really central to our mission of helping governors identify and then advance best practices in state government. I'm so excited just to see the level of engagement from across the country, all the state leaders that are involved in this and then highlighted in the report, and really interested and excited to hear from the 2 governors who are joining us later today. As I mentioned briefly, just a little bit about the Center for Best Practices. Our team works with governors and their policy staff to identify and implement promising practices in state government. And our mission is to support governors as they advance their policy goals. And I can't think of a topic more important than evidence and data that underlies so much of what we do across all the different policy sectors. A large part of what we do ends up being highlighting and sharing best practices, highlighting and sharing examples of what states and governors are doing, and doing that through virtual briefings like this event, through ad hoc and focused state-on-state technical assistance, through in-person convenings and through written publications. And that's really what makes this effort so appealing. We're so excited to see these states highlighted and to continue this partnership, which, as I mentioned before, is really at the core of our mission, helping raise the profile of the great work happening in state government and governors. I think this is, by my count, the third or fourth year that we've worked together. I think we go back to about 2017. And this work really just presents such a great opportunity for our two organizations to come together, highlight the work that states are doing, and really help show that states are leading the way out there, implementing best practices, improving policy, and ultimately making state government better. So again, I really appreciate all of you for participating in the event today, and really want to thank each of you for taking the time to join, and thank our partners at Results for America. And with that, I will turn it back. Thanks all.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kristen Walker, and it's my honor to serve as the Chief Deputy Director for the North Carolina Office of State Budget and Management. In North Carolina, as in the rest of the world, the effects of the pandemic have been tremendous, with more than 19,000 lives lost, nearly a fourth of our residents having missed last month's rent or mortgage payment, and more than 1 in 10 adults reporting that there is either sometimes or often not enough to eat in just the last 7 days. However, North Carolina has also had one of the lowest death rates per capita and one of the lowest rates of job loss per capita. We are also in the top 10 nationally in GDP recovery. Our state's strong focus and commitment to using data and evidence to guide decisions at all levels, from healthcare to economic aid to state budgeting, have led to this comparative success. Early in the pandemic, Governor Cooper directed our state's Department of Health and Human Services to increase the inclusion of racial and ethnic demographic data in disease reporting, to determine the impact of the pandemic on communities of color, and to use that data to allocate resources to then reduce the adverse health impacts on racial and ethnic minorities. Similarly, when it came time for vaccine distribution, North Carolina required providers to collect demographic data on vaccine recipients, and we prioritized community-based vaccine clinics with proportional allotments of vaccines to historically marginalized communities. We were recognized by the CDC this past summer for our efforts around vaccine equity. These efforts would not have been possible without the collection of the data and the subsequent use of available evidence to make these decisions. As with other states, we have received billions in federal pandemic aid, and we have also used data and evidence to prioritize where we invest those dollars. This past spring, Governor Cooper's American Rescue Plan budget recommendations focused on key areas for recovery, including assisting families most impacted by the pandemic, upgrading our infrastructure, particularly high-speed internet and water and sewer, preparing our workforce, promoting business development and innovation, and also positioning government to best serve our residents. In these budget recommendations, my office included data and evidence for each proposal, including anticipated outcomes from the funding. I am pleased to say that many of these recommendations were taken up by our state's legislature, and we are on a path to make our recovery fast, equitable, and effective. We cannot achieve speed, equity, and effectiveness without a firm grounding in data and evidence. And this foundation has enabled us to best serve North Carolinians as we move from response to recovery. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you today. I'll now turn it over to Patrick Carter, who will speak on the use of data to advance racial equity in Minnesota.
Thank you, Kristin. We are humbled that Results for America recognized Minnesota as a leading state in the use of evidence and data. Minnesotans expect effective, impactful, and equitable government services. And we've benefited from a dedicated effort among legislative and executive branch leaders to use the best available data and research to guide decision-making, and we strive to meet our residents' expectations. State and local leaders here have built a culture that's prompted people to consistently ask what high quality research is available and who is impacted. I'll highlight a few of the efforts related to this last question, who is impacted. We built a demographics data tool that provides summary level information on income, race, and other characteristics of the people included in over 1,300 studies that undergird 330 evidence-based practices being used in Minnesota. This tool also allows policymakers in Minnesota, or anywhere for that matter, to see who is represented in the research that we use to inform budget and policy decisions. The results of our analysis provide some confidence that the evidence basis for these programs often reflect Minnesotans served. However, in many cases, the underlying evidence does not disaggregate outcomes by these demographic characteristics. This finding prompted us to ask our researchers here in Minnesota and those with whom we interact with across the country to conduct studies that use a sample size and research design that allow for the reporting of results by specific characteristics of the study population. Speaking of new research, we recently partnered with external scholars on a project to identify what messages, messengers, and incentives could encourage Black and Hispanic communities to increase rates of COVID-19 testing and vaccine uptake. These are just a couple of examples of how Minnesota's built a culture of using evidence to inform decision-making with an emphasis on understanding who is impacted by the policy and budget decisions that we make. With that said, there are still many opportunities to expand our use of evidence in the policymaking process, all in the interest of producing better and more equitable outcomes for Minnesotans. Thank you again to Results for America for highlighting this work in Minnesota. I'll now turn it over to Kristin from Tennessee. Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick and Kristen. I'm Kristen Lotz. I'm the director of the Office of Evidence and Impact for the state of Tennessee. First, I'd like to thank RFA for the great work that they do, the resources they provide, and their recognition of the important work states are doing across the country to ensure that public sector decisions are driven by evidence. The Office of Evidence and Impact was created in the fall of 2019 by Governor Lee with a mission to improve the use of data and evidence in decision-making in Tennessee. And that's both in policymaking and in budgeting. Our office accomplishes this through three separate but connected streams of work. We work with our state agencies to create inventories of their programs, and utilizing an evidence framework that we've established for the state, we're able to identify the level of evidence for each of those programs. We also work to promote the sharing of data between our state agencies so that we might be better able to gain cross-functional insights into what programs and services are working for our citizens. And finally, we work with our agencies to ensure evidence and outcome data are included in their budget requests. Although we've only existed for right at 2 years, we've already made great strides in incorporating evidence into our state budget process. Our evidence-based budgeting work draws upon the work we are doing to inventory and establish an evidence level for our state programs, as well as the work we are doing to advance enterprise data analytics in Tennessee. But we also provide evidence-based budgeting forms for our departments to use with each cost increase request and each reduction proposal that they submit as a part of their annual budget process. Now, we took a phased approach with this new process. Initially, we created one form for cost increases, and in the first year, the form was optional. In the second year, which was last year, we started with the cost increase form and quickly realized, thanks to the pandemic, that we also needed to understand the effectiveness of programs for which reductions were proposed. For the FY23 budget process, which is currently underway, we had both forms ready for use by the agencies, and we also held our inaugural evidence-based budgeting training for our departments. With the support of the Lee administration, these requests for data and evidence have now become just a regular part of our budget process. The information provided by the agencies is then compiled by the Office of Evidence and Impact and provided to our state decision makers in the form of reports that explain the level of evidence associated with programs for which budget requests have been made. We're also able to provide outcome data for programmatic requests. The steps we've taken to ensure our state budget is informed by data and evidence have enabled our state leadership to make better informed budgeting decisions, and I'm proud of the work that we're doing in Tennessee. Now back to RFA.
Great, thanks, Kristen, Patrick, and Kristin for bringing to life all these ways in which data and evidence are powering your decision-making. All the practices described by those 3 states and many more are featured in the State Standard of Excellence, which you can take a look at. And there are a bunch of links and resources available to bring to life more of the work that they've done. Good afternoon, my name is Josh Inaba. I'm a senior manager here at Results for America. I'm excited to introduce our two speakers today. They're 2 leaders focused on getting better results for residents through improving the performance and efficiency of government and the public sector. Governor Spencer Cox has served as city councilman, mayor, county commissioner, and member of the Utah House before being appointed as the Utah Lieutenant Governor in 2013. Since 2020, he served as the governor and has led the state on challenges such as the coronavirus crisis, homelessness, suicide prevention, and bullying. Governor Cox is now leading the state's economic recovery with increased funding for education in rural communities across the state. He's also a staunch leader and advocate for civility in politics, and is committed to improving opportunities for all of Utah's residents. Robert Shea has been working to improve government performance over the last 25 years, including 10 years at Grant Thornton and 15 years in the federal government. Most notably, he served for 6 years as the Associate Director for the White House of Office of Management and Budget. Robert currently serves on Results for America's Federal Advisory Committee and is a fellow and former chairman of the National Academy of Public Administration. And he also has served on the Federal Commission for Evidence-Based Policymaking. So we'll tune into a conversation with Governor Cox and Robert Shea about the work underway in Utah to improve results for residents.
So the Invest in What Works State Standard of Excellence helps demonstrate that states can use data and evidence to improve all kinds of outcomes: economic recovery, pandemic response, equity for residents and governments, even improving the capacity to use data and evidence. So in 2021, the Results for America identified 9 leading states that are paving the way with their use of data and evidence-based practices, policies, programs, and systems. Utah is among those leading states. Governor, we're so delighted that you've taken time to speak with us about Utah's leadership on this important work.
Well, thank you, Robert. It's an honor for me representing our state to be with you today.
So, like all governors, you're facing an enormous array of challenges. Can you talk about how you've used data and evidence of what works to face those challenges and to improve outcomes for Utahns?
Sure. Thank you for the question. I've been a big believer. I come from the private sector and use data in running my company, and felt that the best policymaking was evidence-based policymaking. It takes the politics out of it. And of course, we're so divided as a country that the more we use data, the more we're able to innovate and solve the problems that are facing Americans and are facing Utahns. And so when I became governor, just a little less than a year ago, we decided that we would make this part of our administration. And so we put together what we call the One Utah Roadmap. It's a guide that we developed with a team of more than 100 community leaders who volunteered their time to help us develop this shared vision of principles and priorities and a to-do list. We've been in office now a little more than 300 days, and we've been using this as a way to check our progress. And again, using data to inform the most important decisions. Like a lot of states, Utah is still in the midst of this pandemic that unfortunately has faced us over the past 2 years. And by focusing in on the data, we were able to use some approaches to reopen quickly and safely through the pandemic. Early on, the Utah's Governor's Office of Management and Budget sponsored researchers at the University of Utah to study how wide-scale testing, rapid contact tracing, and quarantine might keep the economy open and enable Utahns to really re-engage in the most important activities. But we didn't just focus on the economic benefits. We also felt it was so important to get our school kids back in school. And we used some of the data and the best practices and shared that with the CDC, and which we were able to get our schools open before just about any other state and do so safely. We estimate that we saved over 110,000 in-person instruction student days last school year. And that data was then used by the CDC to help schools in other states open back up. So there are lots of examples of ways we've been able to use this. The last one I would just share is that we were very worried early in the pandemic when we noticed that our multicultural communities were being hit harder in this state. And so we convened our multicultural advisory committee, again, using the data that they brought with them and with some of our researchers, and found ways to reach out to those communities to help get them PPE, to help them make sure that they were using best practices in work and with the entrepreneurs there, and then focusing on those communities when it came to vaccination rates so that we could increase the vaccination rate. For example, among our Hispanic and Latino individuals increased by 463% in the same time that the vaccination rate among white individuals increased by 262%, because we're using the data and focusing on those communities. So those are just a couple areas where we've really been able to hone in on data to improve the lives of the citizens here in Utah.
Yeah, you really highlighted some of the common challenges your fellow governors are facing. You telegraphed early, you mentioned the One Utah roadmap. You telegraphed early that you were going to rely on data and evidence in governing the state. Now, you've committed to tracking and reporting your performance. Tell us about your journey. You mentioned you were in the private sector, but tell us how you really thought that this could help improve and transform the state government.
Sure. Well, I've been very lucky to have served at all levels of government. I began as a city councilman in my small town of Fairview of only 1,200 people. After that, I served as a mayor and a county commissioner, and then a state legislator before being named lieutenant governor for 7.5 years before I ran for governor. And during all of that experience, and then again running a private telecommunications company, I realized that I could overcome some of the biggest divides in our small town and larger in county and state government, and then with my business by making sure that we used evidence-based practices in everything that we did. So if we weren't sure what direction to go, we would do the research, and that was an easier way to change hearts and minds. By the way, it also changed my heart and my mind sometimes, and I think that's something that's really missing today, that humility, the ability to think again. We get so stuck in a framework or in our political tribes that we sometimes miss the answers to solutions that are right in front of us. So by keeping an open mind and by letting the data really guide us in our decision making, I believe that we've been able to make better decisions, again, at every level of government, and that's really been part of my journey. I think that's proven out. Utah has a 2.2% unemployment right now, the second lowest in the country. We have the most job growth. We're one of just a couple states that it has more jobs now than when the pandemic began, and so we feel like we're headed in the right direction. But it really really does take discipline. It has to be intentional. And that's what we've tried to empower all of our agencies to do. And by the way, not just empower them and saying, hey, this is what we want you to do, but we've even put it into law. We had a law that was passed just last year that we worked on with the legislature, that we signed into practice, that any budget request over $10,000 would require actual metrics that we can measure, performance metrics, to make sure that we're spending our money in the best way possible. Look, government makes mistakes all the time, and we're no different. But what we want to do is we want to fail quickly. Too often when government fails, we just double down and we throw more money at it, and we're not paying attention to whether or not it's actually making a difference. But we're trying to change that so that we're constantly measuring what we're doing. If it's succeeding, we put more resources there. If we're failing, we fail quickly and we move off of that and go to something else and try something else until it does work.
Yeah, having worked on performance budgeting for most of my career, that's really inspiring that you were able to get that law passed and that it's driving change. But I also understand you're launching a new performance management system. Talk about that and how you see that really helping drive or accelerate your adoption of evidence-based practices.
Yeah, so Utah has led the way in performance measurement for a long time, and performance metrics have actually been required for these new funding items for about 10 years. But as we were talking to different agencies and people that have worked in this, going back, in addition to legislative requirements for line items, the executive branch of the Governor's Office of Management and Budget had implemented a framework for tracking improvements from 2013 to 2020 known as Success. And that program tracked the Success framework, saw about a 35% improvement during those years. Most of those measures were very impactful and helped us to increase the impact of tax dollars. But what was missing was this unified vision, and some agencies felt kind of overburdened. It's easy in this area of budgeting and governance to become too focused on compliance, and you end up spending a lot of resources just checking boxes and filling out paperwork. And so we felt that the pendulum can swing a little too far that way. So we wanted to improve resources that are meant to empower agencies to innovate and problem solve. And so the goal of our new performance measurement bill is to collaborate with the legislative branch to make a streamlined process that leads to results, not just burdensome requirements. It's a really big deal. We're committed to working in tandem to ensure that we all hold each other accountable for the results that we promise to the taxpayers. And so we're trying to produce this culture of innovation. We support managers and implementers with the tools they need to innovate and succeed. We're really working hard to ensure that performance measurements are effective, that they measure what they're supposed to measure and give us the data that we need to improve. And then we present that data publicly to increase government transparency and make ourselves better. And so we're just starting down this path. We're very excited. Actually, appointed or created a new position in state government, a chief innovation officer, something we haven't had here in the state of Utah, who's working directly with every one of our cabinet members, our agency heads, and the implementers to make sure that we're measuring the right things, that we're not overburdening them with just reporting, but that we're actually seeing a difference as well. And it's all coming together. We're so excited about this next year and what the future holds for this new system.
Thank you, Governor. We've sure covered the landscape in the brief period of time we've been together. You've inspired our audience, hopefully, to invest in this. Thanks for your time. And most importantly, thanks for your commitment to evidence-based, database decision-making.
Thank you, Robert.
Hi, I'm Nicole Dunn, Vice President for Federal Policy. I'm honored to introduce two amazing leaders who have spent their entire careers championing evidence-based policy to make our government work better. First, Governor Polis is an entrepreneur, education leader, public servant, and advocate of data-driven decision-making. In addition to his career in business and as an entrepreneur, Governor Polis served 6 years on the State Board of Education, where he worked to raise pay for teachers and reduce class size for students. Most recently, as the U.S. Representative for Colorado's 2nd Congressional District, Governor Polis was ranked the most effective member of Colorado's House delegation due to his success working across the aisle to improve Colorado's schools, protect public lands, and support startups and small businesses. And Cecilia Munoz is Vice President for Public Interest Technology and Local Initiatives at New America, and one of our senior fellows here at Results for America. Before joining New America in 2017, she served on President Obama's senior staff, first as Director of Intergovernmental Affairs for 3 years, followed by 5 years as Director of the White House Domestic Policy Council. Thank you both. Now let's listen to a conversation between Governor Polis and Cecilia Munoz about how data and evidence are helping the governor and his team make data-driven decisions to drive an equitable recovery for Colorado.
Governor, thank you so much for being here today. It's a real honor to talk to you about your vision, your efforts to be the kind of leader who is focused on using data and evidence to really deliver for the people of Colorado. Your administration has worked really hard to create a culture of accountability that focuses on data-driven decision-making. So let's dig in and see how and why you do this important work. So we're having this conversation at a really challenging time for people who are governing. The last couple of years have posed just unprecedented challenges for leaders at every level of government. Can you talk a little bit about the data that you've tracked in Colorado, what you've tracked most closely, what's been most helpful to you in making decisions to help your residents during this difficult moment?
Certainly more than ever before, COVID-19 and decision-making around it has highlighted the importance of relying on science and data in public service. The stakes were never higher, literally life and death, both from a health perspective and an economic perspective. And when making decisions the last 2 years, I've really leaned heavily on evidence and data to guide our work. And that's daily briefings about caseloads, vaccination rates, hospital capacities, economic strength of our state, meeting daily with scientists and data leaders. We had significant projects around mobility and data that was very helpful in the early lives of the pandemic and helped Colorado have one of the lowest death rates per capita of any state and one of the stronger economic rebounds. We also review key economic indicators, including data from the U.S. Census Bureau, state and local data for employment patterns, changes, supply chain issues. The more specific that we can tailor our policy responses and countermeasures to data in a responsive way, the more successful we'll be, while also minimizing unintended consequences. And looking beyond the pandemic, we can't lose sight of the key issues that are important for Coloradans and all Americans. And that's why we track progress in a very visual way on our governor's dashboard, aligning with our policy goals and our WIGs to improve early childhood education, making childcare more affordable, reduce the cost of healthcare, save people money, and reach our renewable energy goals as a state.
Love a good dashboard. So it's becoming increasingly clear as the country focuses on equity of all kinds, that it's really state and local governments that are the drivers of equity. So can you talk a little bit about how you are responding, how you're building equity into your budget in particular, and what kind of tools you're using?
Yeah, equity is really at the core of our budget. This year, there are one-time funds that can be transformational. Working with our legislature, we're focused on 3 big areas, each of which has rampant inequities. One is housing that's affordable. The second is access to behavioral health care, substance abuse treatment, mental health treatment. And the third is tools to find good paying jobs, workforce advancement, and workforce training. Gaps exist along geographic lines, rural and urban, racial lines, gender lines, And really that is at the core of the planning around how we can maximize the impact of this investment. The budget is really the tool that controls the inputs, which ultimately drive the outputs and outcomes that we should expect from government. And our focus is on how government leaders can make that connection between data-driven inputs in the budget process and measurable outcomes to hold ourselves accountable. All departments, as part of our budget process, include evidence information in their budget requests. Then our budget office, under the capable leadership of Lauren Larson, grades the data on a 1 to 5 scale to gauge how much we know about the data and support for a program's impact. That ensures that the state of Colorado is making sound allocation decisions that maximize the help for people's lives. I'm grateful for the leadership of the state legislature, which has also been supportive of our movement in this direction. In fact, formalizing into law the data-driven aspects in Senate Bill 21-284. This awareness helps analyze the budget work, including budget items, including an equity focus. But that's just the first step. And we're going to continue to hone that budget process to ensure our state is making the best decisions with the data available for each and every Coloradan.
Can you talk a little bit about the legislation as well? Like, was that a collaborative process?
It was. We effectively had put our practice that we were doing into law, which usually, chief executives are reticent to do. And, we'd like to preserve the prerogative of future chief executives. But we felt that this is such an important practice for our state that we're happy to bind future governors to it. It's a data-driven process that, as part of the budgeting process, that we were engaged with anyway. And it's a good legacy, I think, to leave, to make sure that Colorado, regardless of who their future governors are, will adhere to a data-driven budget process.
Indeed. So Results for America's 2021 State Standard of Excellence highlighted Colorado's newly launched Reimagine State Government Initiative in 2020, which identifies 6 pillars of operational excellence across state agencies, and it ties them to specific quantifiable goals. Can you talk a little bit more about this initiative and how effective it's been and what you've learned from it?
Well, a few weeks into the pandemic, we knew things were going to change forever. We convened our cabinet and asked them what they were concerned about on a day-to-day operational basis in the new normal, especially with remote work. And everyone agreed that the state government had to adapt and change and work in ways that we never had before. And we knew we had to reimagine the way government operates. And specifically, we knew that personnel systems, facility operations, assets and resource management all had to change on a dime to provide critical services that the people of Colorado need. So we broke it down into 6 areas and had a clear measurable goal in each area. First, we started with our people, and we developed strategies that tied back to supporting our people in professional communities. For those who work in 24/7 facilities who had to go to work during every part of the pandemic, we're one of the fastest states in the country to deploy testing and vaccines to keep people safe and protected. We have similar support for our employees during the pandemic. We set a higher minimum wage for in-home caregivers of $15 an hour, family medical leave, making sure that state workers, if they were experiencing COVID symptoms, would have paid time off so they didn't have a disincentive to go to work and be contagious. We implemented new flexible work arrangements and policies. In fact, we have a goal now, state government, coming out of this to reduce the square footage of state office space by 1 million square feet over 3 years, because we're incorporating the ability to work remotely into the plans going forward. And of course, we focus on our customers, the people of Colorado. We move services online, from driver's license renewal to My Colorado app. We converted 150,000 government transactions from in-person to virtual last year, marriage licenses, and many others. And all the while, we continue to capture cost savings and efficiency savings along the way. And we're now proposing some aggressive fiscal responsibility packages to lock in these savings, increasing our reserve, and really taking advantage of the nimbleness and quickness that was driven by the emergency to create a new generation of best practices for the future.
It's amazing. So for people who govern, I've learned that sometimes, particularly when you're a reformer and an innovator in the way that you've been, that it's also personal. So can you talk a little bit about kind of how you got here? What drove you to kind of create this evidence focus in state government?
Well, I was a businessman before I went into politics, and so very familiar with bottom line and measurable outcomes in the flower business, customer acquisition costs, lead indicators, looking at different customer acquisition channels by cost of acquisition. So it's really been a fundamental truth in my career to rely on data and evidence to drive better results. And the people who are able to define problems and shape their thinking using insights from facts are also better prepared to solve these problems and create the institutions around solving the problems, aligning incentives with the overall goals. As Albert Einstein said, if I had 20 days to solve a problem, I would spend 19 of those days defining the problem. And it is really that kind of thinking that drives everything we do in state government in Colorado. We set an expectation using data and evidence in meetings that I'm part of the process, and then we empower people to meet those expectations and having the creativity to be able to do that.
And what does it mean? This is the last question, and then we'll let you go. But so your team, the state of Colorado has been recognized as a leading state in this year's State Standard of Excellence from Results for America. Can you talk a little bit about what that means for you and for your team?
Well, I'm certainly proud of that. It's a great honor to be recognized by Results for America. And I want to thank Results for America for really elevating the issue of efficiency and good government. We're in good company with my friend, Governor Cox, and all the other states that are recognized. There are many states who, like us, are elevating data and evidence above partisanship, above the well-connected and the lobbyists. And every day, leaders and public servants are striving to make government more efficient, to deliver better customer support at a better value at a lower cost. That's interbranch, it's bipartisan. It's important to work across legislative, executive, and judicial. And if states are truly the laboratories of democracy, the use of data and evidence helps us be more effective technicians in those laboratories. And that's why I particularly appreciate your work in helping to elevate that work and spread best practices across state and local governments.
This really is how we make democracy stronger, isn't it? I would just so appreciate your leadership, your willingness to talk about it with all of us, but especially the work that you're doing across the state of Colorado and the example that you're setting for the rest of the country. Governor, thank you so much.
Thank you, Cecilia.
On behalf of Results for America, I want to thank Governors Cox and Polis. Want to thank our partners from Tennessee and North Carolina and Minnesota. Would like to thank our partners at the National Governors Association, as well as all of you for being with us here today. We hope you are all as optimistic about the future growing momentum on a bipartisan level across state governments across the United States toward building and using data and evidence to improve outcomes for all. Thank you and have a great afternoon.